coming, everyone. Welcome to this year's Marine Rescue Forum. Our topic today is going to be marine plastic pollution. We're going to talk a bit about what the problem is, what sort of impacts it's having, and what we can do about it. It's not all doom and gloom, we hope, but we'll see. We've got our brilliant panel here, which I'll get to in just a minute. I just want to give a little bit of an intro into what the topic is. Or not.
It's a rock concert.
First eardrum. Okay. So plastics have been a part of our lives massively for the last 50 years. It's all around us. I mean, the chairs we're sitting on right now, water bottles, food packaging, it's just so ingrained in our lives. I think I did have... Oh, bear with me while I juggle everything. There. So this is just a standard supermarket aisle, just every single thing wrapped in plastic. It's what we see every day. Whoop. Oh, sorry. It's what we see every day, something that we have to deal with every day. And they're inexpensive, they're safe to use, they're sanitary, but they last forever, which is great for a product, but it's also terrible in the case of plastics because there's about 300 million tonnes of plastic produced every year, and half of this goes into disposable plastic items, so things that you use once and you throw away. So things like plastic bags, water bottles, this sort of stuff, you use it once, it goes into the bin, it then hopefully gets recycled, but a lot of the time it ends up on our streets and in our waterways. So the first plastic pollution was documented in the oceans in the 1960s, and this is unfortunately a really common sight that we see now. It's estimated about 8 million tonnes of plastic enters our ocean every year, and it's estimated that by 2050, in about 30 years' time, you're going to have more plastic in the ocean than fish. So the issues that we're seeing is that marine animals are getting tangled in plastic, they're ingesting it, they're being poisoned by it. So we're going to touch on a bit of this today. So without further ado, this is our wonderful panel. So we have Brett in place for Sarah Jo, but I'll give Sarah Jo's intro. She will be here soon. So Sarah Jo, when she does get here, she's a marine science and conservation educator for ocean tidings. And then we have Dr. Scott Wilson, who's a senior lecturer in ecotoxicology at Macquarie University. And he's also the lead research scientist for AUSMAP, which is the Australian Microplastics Assessment. Oh my God. Rock does it. Next up we have Harriet Spark, who's the founder of Operation Straw and Grumpy Turtle Design. And next we have Terry Cummins, who is the president of Dive Queensland. We have Monica Chin, who is from Aradinawan Research Education and Conservation Centre, or ADREC. And we also have Fiona Merida, who is the assistant director of tourism and reef education for the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. Not a mouthful at all. So I think the best way to start off is to just go around and so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better and know your expertise. So first thing I want to ask is, can you give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do and who you work for and who you work with? Do we have the other? Oh, you've got it? Yeah.
Quick. Can everyone hear it? Yep, cool. So Sarah Jo, who's my partner, she's basically dedicating her life around plastics, mainly working within individuals, communities, NGOs to basically drive change at the cold face. Many people are driving policy and everything else inside of government, but really, there's a lot at the grassroots that need to be done. So that's pretty much where she dedicates her life, giving up a day job, just purely focused on conservation.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So I'm Scott. So I'm an academic at Macquarie University. I've been in researching plastic pollution for the last 15 years or so, before it was actually topical. I'm particularly interested in around the impacts of plastic and the harm it's having to not only our marine life, but freshwater organisms and even in our terrestrial landscapes as well. So I'm part of a project that is a citizen science program called AUSMAP, which is the Australian Microplastic Assessment Project, which is helping us and you guys helping us gather information on how much microplastic is out there so we can document the hotspots and get some management in place in those hotspot areas. So I'll talk a bit about that a bit later.
Hey everybody, I started off in marine conservation because I was a dive instructor, and I feel like as fellow divers probably here, you understand that when you're in the ocean, you really want to protect it. And so I discovered that communications was a really important part of protecting our ocean because we need to tell people about the threats the ocean's facing. So I ended up studying design and film, and now I run my business working for different brands and organisations and people who are doing good for the oceans and the planet. And one of the side projects I run is called Operation Straw. And I used to dive instruct at the old aquarium in Manly. You might have been there, it was there for 50 years. And at the front of Manly, we used to go snorkeling on our lunch break and we'd find hundreds and hundreds of plastic straws. So we decided to start a project called Operation Straw. We'd count all the straws we found over a consecutive period of time, and then we'd use that data to talk to businesses in the local area and ask them to change their habits. And we found thousands of plastic straws today. We teamed up with OzMap and we run beach cleanups in Manly, and we go strawkling, which is snorkeling for straws. So it's been a really great community project and a different way of tackling the plastic pollution problem. Oh no! That's what you get for using takeaway coffee cups.
No, that was actually dropping my teaching aid because, anyway, I'm Terry Cummins, and some of you may know me. I've been in the diving industry all my life, worked for PADI and other training agencies. I was a director of Project Aware during its foundation years, where we started looking at this whole problem, not just with plastics, but generally with the marine environment, and what we could do as divers to actually bring to the public's attention more, our duty, if you like, to be able to convey those messages that are so important to the general public, because we've always had the feeling that divers are down there. We actually see what the impact is often more than anybody else. And it was really encouraging the other day to be at the Breakfast for the Boat Show as one of the exhibitors, to hear that the boating industry is also getting on board and educating their people. On a more micro level, I live in Cairns, I'm president of Dive Queensland, and what we've done is we've started a campaign working with other groups to actually change the thinking that people have along the many restaurants that are bordering along our esplanade. And I can say now that nearly all of them are actually now out of plastic in terms of straws and things like that, and we've got the whole community starting to think about it. You might also realise, if you're not a Queenslander, that having helium balloons is actually not a good idea at your kids' parties, and in Queensland it's actually an offence to let that go, because that's, with our turtles and other animals that you saw in the slides, is so important. So yeah, I'm really a passionate person about the topic, so I hope I can contribute something. But we all have to do our little bit, you know, bring our own coffee cups and really set an example, because if we can't do it, no one will. You know, we're the leaders.
Hi everybody, my name is Monica Chin. I'm all the way from North Borneo, Malaysia, if you know about Sipadan. So I'm on the other side, near the city. What makes me so passionate into this plastic pollution is I've been scuba diving for 20 years. So in 2012, and I saw first dugong with my late mother in 1989 on my backyard, where my father loved to fishing. So, and when the time come, like I travel around Asia working, so when I go back to my hometown, I can't see them anymore. And the last dugong has died. Along the way, I've noticed that a lot of big marine mammal like gentle giant die every single day. So that makes me wonder, what can I do for our ocean? What can I do for our planet? And today, I can proudly tell all of you, I've stopped using single-use mineral water plastic bottle for the past 7 years. I made it. It's hard. It's really hard. But when you see when you saw that what not everyone can see, you will automatically think what you can do to change from the pollution become a solution. So I stopped along the journey, 7 years. I do a lot of research. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a master or anyone. I'm just a normal scuba diver. But I do a lot of research. I join a lot of dive show. I learn from the biologists. I learn from the science. I just learn, research, and there where I am today. So, like Mr. Terry said, everything starts from us. So I wish to use my behavior, what I've done, to change more people's behavior. So I believe that actions speak louder. I want to influence the people around the world that everyone can change it. Everyone can do something because I believe in people power. So I'm the director, one of the director of AIDE Conservation Center in Malaysia. And we do a lot of educational program around our state and our province. And a coastal line is very important, as well as we welcome all the researchers from around the world to join us and contribute something. Yeah, that's about me. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Sorry. As was mentioned, I work for the Australian government, federal government, with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and effectively the role that I play in this is I try to be the conduit between those grassroots campaigns and the policymakers, trying to influence and lead substantial funding to tackle the problem, not just in cleanups but also in source reduction. It's a core part of my job, and really what drove me with the plastic pollution mission is really that I spent my childhood walking beaches and picking up shells, and my boys now spend their childhood walking beaches and picking up plastic and picking up the little lids from the little rings that are from there, and I think that sucks. Yeah, I don't want that to be their future, and then I don't know what their children's futures, what they're going to be picking up from the beaches, but it certainly won't be the shells that I got to experience. I also manage the Reef HQ aquarium elements of that, and that's where we do turtle rescue, and so we quite commonly will find turtles that are suffering from float that are filled with plastics, and once you look into the eyes of an old turtle, it passes away and you cut it open and see what's inside. It's pretty, it hurts as well, so that's what I do.
Yeah, great. I'll get you to hold on to that one. All right, thank you everyone. So as you can see, we have a really diverse panel here. We've got conservationists, scientists, people involved in policy making. So let's just start off, first up, if anyone in the audience has any questions at this point, anything they want to know about the plastic pollution problem, anything like that. They won't buy it, I promise. Nothing? All right. Well, I might start off with a question then. So I think a good place to start is probably going to be what exactly the plastic pollution problem is and why it's so important. So the first thing that I'd probably want to talk about, now Fiona, you're based on the Great Barrier Reef, and Terry as well, this might relate to you. Up in Queensland, what sort of items of plastic are you seeing in these environments, on the beaches or on the reef?
What is commonly found across the Great Barrier Reef, we've kind of got it's broken down into two areas. So we've got the northern parts of the Great Barrier Reef, where we're finding that a lot of the sources are actually coming from international waters. The oceans have no boundaries, so whilst we can potentially sit in our beautiful developed country that has some pretty good waste management and everything else, and look to blame other people from other countries and what they're doing, again, I'd suggest that the ocean doesn't have any boundaries, and so we're getting a lot of debris that's coming down from those waters. It's things like plastics, plastic water bottles. As I said to you, you know the lollipops, those sticks on the lollipops. We find them all the time. The lids of the plastic water bottles, the rings from the plastic water bottles, and then a whole raft of other, by the time we get to it, we can't identify, where it was or what it came from. You also obviously find little cigarette butts as well is one of the other things that you'll find most commonly on the beaches. But they're probably the main things that we find along those beaches, which from other than the very top of the Great Barrier Reef, are all coming from local sources. Yeah. Yep. So anything that ends up on the beach somehow makes its way into the oceans. Anything that ends up, this is the really tricky and key part, is that you can live, all the catchments and waterways on the Great Barrier Reef lead to the Great Barrier Reef. So you can live quite a distance from the Great Barrier Reef and you can drop your thing or leave it in a park accidentally, it blows, ends up in the drain and makes its way to the Great Barrier Reef and to those beaches and islands around there.
Yeah, great. Terry, do you tend to see the same sort of things with all your diving that you're doing? Are you seeing the same sorts of plastic washing up everywhere?
Yeah, I don't want to detract from your question because I think Fiona actually covered it really well, but going back into my opening comments, I think it's what we can do as individuals to stop what we're actually seeing out there. One of the initiatives some of the dive stores in Cairns are now doing with their suppliers of equipment to stop this stuff ending up in the ocean at the source is to actually refuse to take shipments of diving equipment that are wrapped in plastic. And little initiatives like that. And this coffee cup was a teaching aid, although I did enjoy the coffee. But, the idea of carrying your own coffee cup, and if you are a smoker, don't dump your cigarette butt. It's like 10 years, isn't it, for a cigarette butt to disappear? And I come back to that point all the time with some of my friends. 50 years ago, when I was only a young nipper, right, we put a man on the moon, right? If we can't actually change what we've got today with the added technology we've got, we're not trying. And that's really one of the take-home points I wanted to make on this panel. And yes, we see exactly what Fiona sees out there. I also think that there's been an encouragement amongst our dive operators on the vessels now to be eco-certified and to actually have the recycling and all the other things. But it is a complex thing because if we're going to take cardboard to replace plastic, where's the cardboard coming from? No use chopping down more trees to replace plastic. So this is a complex issue that we've got to think about. And I'm actually working on a little bit in my own PhD on this, and that's the sustainability of scuba diving generally. Because when you think about it, if that ocean disappears, all of us divers are going to be diving in a sewer. Are we going to go? No. Sorry. I hope I didn't change the topic too much.
No, that's fine. That was great. It's all valuable information. So probably, I guess, on this topic of the types of plastic that we're seeing, Harriet, probably a good opportunity to go to you and talk about, you run your strawkels as part of Operation Straw. Why exactly are you focusing on straws as opposed to other plastics that are out there?
So I actually ran beach cleans for like 5 years before I started Operation Straw, and you'd have like the same handful of people showing up, a couple of kids, a couple of parents, and it was just hard to make it sexy a little bit. So what we did is we decided to start calling them strawkels. We'd get in the ocean and clean them up, and we found we started focusing on straws because in the area we were in, they were genuinely a really big problem. You would have seen last year that straws were like all over the news. They were the big thing that people had to stop. The reason we focused on them wasn't because of that. It was because they were we were finding hundreds in this tiny little bay in Manly. And so I wanted to hone in on that one item because single-use plastic is a huge problem and it's really overwhelming. And if you talk about it, it's very hard for individuals to not use any single-use plastic. You go into the supermarket and as you showed, everything's wrapped in it. And I don't live plastic-free. I do my best. And I think for people who are new to the issue, it can be quite hard for them to engage with it because if we get overwhelmed with something, we switch off. And so we found that by starting with just straws and just one item, it made it quite easy for people to understand that by starting with this one item, that they can go from there. So it's kind of like, it's not the only item. We think of it as the gateway item, and then from there they can do so much more. So that's why we decided to just focus on one item as opposed to everything.
Yeah, I guess when it's the main item that you're seeing in the area that you're, like you said, it's you're just bombarded with these plastic straws everywhere. It's a good place to start, and a good place to start that conversation as well with the people out there, like on the beach when you get out of the water. I think it's...
And we actually, when we have our straw calls, we collect all the straws and then we put them in categories. So like we could find out McDonald's ones, like Slurpee ones, Hungry Jack's ones, and then like the long ones you get at local bars. And because we could count them and say where they were coming from, we had bars in Manly putting up Instagram posts saying, we see what you're doing and we see that the straws are the ones we use, so we're going to stop using them and find an alternative. So it was a good way by getting so specific that people kind of have to be accountable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you find that you have, like you say, McDonald's straws and these big franchises, have you ever approached them to handle their straws situation? Or?
Yes, so Macca's is a tricky one. You usually get to talk to the general manager, which is an 18-year-old that's like, I can't help you. They're a tricky beast to get to. I think you have to go with the bigger brands. I'm not really into shaming. I find that when you shame businesses and it doesn't work and you're just creating two hostile environments, collaboration works better. But in regards to bigger businesses, because they are so impenetrable, you kind of do have to do that social media shaming, and so it's a tricky one, but you have to pick your battles.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Did you guys have something you wanted to add on that point? No.
I could tell a theory about. I totally agree. I was saying about the shaming. It works the same with government, and government officials and ministers and other people. You can imagine if you have so many issues that you've got to deal with. They are just human beings, just like us, right? So having a conversation with people behind closed doors is always much more powerful and effective than standing up and shaming somebody. And there's actually a beautiful story of a gentleman in the Whitsundays that was on a yacht and spent a lot of time sailing the islands in the Whitsundays, and had done so for a really long time. And he started to notice on the beaches that he was finding water bottles branded with one of the island resorts on it. And he started to collect all of those bottles as he went around, and he collected them. He didn't say anything to anyone. He lives on a yacht by himself. He collected bags and bags and bags of them, and then he made a meeting with the general manager of the resort, and he went in one-on-one with him, and he took all of the bags with him that were the water bottles, and he said to him, this is what I'm finding on all of these different islands around your area, and this is your footprint. And the general manager that day made a decision and cut all water bottles off that island, put in water refill stations, is moving the entire island towards plastic free. They handle all their own waste on that island. They're breaking down their glass and using it to build their buildings and roads. And that island is Hamilton Island. If he had have run a campaign that tried to shame them through social media or the media, he wouldn't have given this gentleman an opportunity to be a hero rather than a villain. And I always think it's better to give someone an opportunity to be a hero rather than a villain.
Yeah, it's a really great statement, actually. Just that last sentence there, that really hits home. All right, well, maybe just still on the topic of the types of plastics that we see, I might actually pass on to you, Scott. You study microplastics. Do you want to first explain what that is and what you sort of find in beaches and what you do with OzMap?
Sure. So microplastics are just a size class of plastic. So anything less than 5 millimetres is classed as microplastic. And what we're finding is a lot of what we're seeing in the environment is breaking up and becoming smaller and smaller. So plastic doesn't go away, and some of those life tables that you hear for items like bottles and cigarette butts, that's only as that product. So what happens is the plastic doesn't go away. It just becomes smaller and smaller over time. As it becomes brittle, it just fragments more and more. And so the issue with that is that once it's small, it becomes more ingestible by everything. So we're seeing microplastics now in everything from microbes, plankton, through to fish, and obviously larger species that we're more familiar with. So the issue is that once it's so small, it can move through the body, so it doesn't just reside in the gut. It can move into the bloodstream and can contaminate those and cause some toxic effects in those species. So what we also look at is, or plastics are generally quite benign generally, but the chemicals associated with a plastic product also comes with that plastic when it's ingested. And so what we're looking at is the toxic effects of really the chemicals associated with these plastics. And we know some of those are affecting growth, development, and survival of these animals. So there's kind of this insidious, more chronic level exposure that we're looking at in our labs, and what potential harm that might have, not only to marine life, but potentially to humans as well. So if we're ingesting, eating a bit of fish, are we then getting plastics or the chemicals from the plastics? So I'll also add that the plastics themselves are quite neat. When they're floating around in the ocean, they actually act like sponges. And so they're sucking up a lot of the other contaminants that are floating in the environment as well. So all the things like heavy metals and pesticides that might be washed off the land are also being attached to those plastics. And so when that animal ingests that plastic, it's getting this cocktail of chemicals that could move into the tissues, and that's what we're potentially consuming.
It's pretty scary when it, becomes something that is potentially impacting our health as humans. Like there's potentially these chemicals that these plastics are carrying, eaten by small fish, bigger fish, and then us. So maybe if you wanted to just expand a little bit more on what potential impacts there are on humans that are eating these fish?
Yeah, we don't really know is the simple answer for that. So there was a report released about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that found, it kind of calculated how much plastic we might be ingesting or inhaling, in fact. So you mentioned about it being around us. So there's potential even in this very room for plastics to be around us, and we're breathing that in. So there was a study released a couple of weeks ago from colleagues from the University of Newcastle here in New South Wales, and they estimated that all the potential sources of plastic, from marine seafood we eat through to bottled water, there's been studies around the world that found there's plastic in salt, and there's plastic in bottled water, and there's plastic in beer. I know. And what they did, they estimated how much we would be eating on a weekly basis, and it was worked out that we'd be consuming about 5 grams of plastic every week. So 5 grams is equivalent to a credit card worth of plastic. So eating, and this is an underestimate. These guys really acknowledge that. It was actually 5 to 8 grams, because we just don't have the information on plastics in all our food sources. It's only what's currently known. In terms of the impacts of that, we don't know. We know the chemicals associated with these plastics, so there's cause for concern there. Some of them are endocrine disruptors. They affect the hormone systems and growth and development, particularly of young. And you might have heard about the BPA being removed out of babies' bottles, drinking bottles. That's because BPA, bisphenol A, is an endocrine disrupting chemical. We've known that for years, that it affects the growth and development of young, not just humans, but all sorts of organisms. And so it was removed because of the potential risk, no proven risk, the potential risk to humans. All they've done is replace that chemical with another chemical, because they need these plasticizers to make their product, to make them strong or more flexible, or to add colour. All these are chemicals that are added to the plastics. And so we know kind of what these chemicals, by themselves, in terms of the hazard, but we don't really know, how much is leaching off the plastics and the cause for concern there. So the science is still out on that, but it's best to use the precautionary principle and kind of avoid these plastics in the first place.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, let's try throwing to the audience again. Has anyone thought of any questions that they want to ask our panel? Now we know a little bit more about them. Yeah, up the front here. Let me pop down with the... Oh, you got it? Thank you.
Do you think the governments of the world are taking this problem serious enough? I mean, we often hear, we talk about global warming, and that's a whole new other subject in itself, but do you believe that, because it's not very often you hear this, there's a lot of activity, but do you believe that governments are really bringing enough pressure to bear on the source of the plastics? I mean, it's amazing how we can do things like we'll set up different emission levels and suddenly the car industry can create incredible engines that put out tiny amounts of pollution. But I don't personally see it on news that governments are really driving back to the people that generate the plastics to actually really seriously do something about it. Because we might say with the global warming issue, but if we kill the see-through plastic pollution, we're in deep trouble anyway.
I would suggest that our reliance and our addiction to plastic as a human race at this point in time is a challenge for all governments. As far as whether the government is doing enough, I'd probably suggest that we can always be doing more, and as awareness is raised, you'll see that even banning plastic bags. The issue with this plastic scenario is that it's consumer driven. So as much as the fact that the people that are sitting here already are people that are already aware, right? There's so many people that just aren't aware, and it was amazing to me that when plastic bags were banned in Queensland, how many people complained about that? How many, and even when you were in the supermarket and you're in the line, there is somebody, really quite irate at the poor girl behind the counter about, I'm not paying for a plastic bag, and what's this about the plastic bags? And so the government is the people, right? It's the voice of the people, and so this is where these grassroots and this raising awareness and having people starting to make those choices about it is so important. Absolutely, the packaging covenant could be looked at, and these things could be banned. And I think that it's only through a groundswell of actually the government going, oh, people care about this issue, that we can do something about it. What I will say is for local governments, waste management and the ineffective use of recycling by households is one of their biggest costs. So most of our rate-paying money is going towards waste management. If people could do better at their own waste management, local governments would love that, which meant state governments would love it, which meant federal governments would love it. Unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of the technology that's required in a lot of regional areas and a lot of other areas to have the level of recycling that's required and sorting. As soon as you start to say to someone, get your rubbish, and start sorting it into 12 different things to then be able to recycle effectively, people are like, oh, come on, I'm too busy, I've got this and I've got that going on. So we have to kind of break the barriers, make it easier, get the groundswell going, so then again government come in and be heroes and go, well, now we'll regulate. It's always better if it can be driven before the regulation component of it, so that they know that they're going to get the support from the population to continue, because there's no point coming in and going, I'm going to ban this, and then the next election you're out, yeah? So I'm not trying to be a government official and talk around the question, but it is quite a complex question, and I'd suggest that out of the people in government that I've spoken to in senior government, they're humans who care as well, and they're like, well, how can we make this happen? If you can get the people and you can help the people drive this, we can make this happen. Right? Yeah. I hope that answers.
I'll just layer on within governments, they're motivated in two facets, right? It is either going to be voting power is going to make them make a change or a move, or they're data driven, right? Every government organisation is data driven. And so for them, I think as citizens, we've got to do a better job to give them data to be empowered to make, enforce changes. So, as good as it is to organise a clean-up and go to your beach, it's great and you're getting a community engaged, but collecting data out of that clean-up, whether that's going into the likes of the Australian Marine Debris programs, OzMaps, there's some amazing stuff, but give these people and give the governments data so they can go back and say, we've got to change policy here because we've got some data points. I don't know if you want to layer onto that.
I'll just add that there are governments doing some good things around the world. So we can take examples from France and in the UK where they are banning single-use plastics on citywide levels. So, but it gets back to that pressure, and that we're saying it is driven, and particularly in Australia, from the ground up. In all those countries, it's public opinion that has swayed, the government's decision to do something. But yeah, data is critical in that, and programs like ours at AusMap, where we're providing that information. I can talk about examples where we're working at local levels and we're getting some on-ground action because of the data showing hotspots of contamination. So there is, it's a slow movement, but there is movement.
I'm going to be a bit controversial and say that I don't think Australia is doing enough on this issue. In New South Wales, we've got a lot of data on the impact of plastic bags. When are we going to ban them? Like, how much data do we need to collect to make a big change like that? And even in regards to climate change, yes, a different issue, but an individual can only do so much, and we need our governments to really take action now, because there's a News Star article coming out every week about we have 12 years to fix the problem, and I just really believe that we need to do more, because we are at this turning point in the environment that is going to have a horrendous impact if we don't have more policy and stronger policy in place. Yeah.
Anyone?
Okay, maybe I share a little bit from North Borneo, what we're doing. We are located in a small island, not too far from the city. So we do data collection because we know that the data collection is so important for the world. For any of organization, foundations, we are welcome to, we are open to share all the data that we collect. So I'm not here to say anything about my government in Malaysia, but I'm sure some of you know that we just changed our government, and it's pretty good so far. They start getting into the environmental issue, pollution, like there is some immediate action and restoration, things like that. So like Fiona said, all the panel here said, we need everybody. We need everybody to make the change, because we are the voices to all the government around the world. Like recently I just came back, early of July, I just came back from Shanghai. It's really dropped my jaw. Really, really dropped my jaw. I thought the city, because a lot of divers from Shanghai said, we changed a lot, this and that, so blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I went there and checked it out. The whole city I went, almost the big city that I went in Shanghai, every 10 steps, there is four bins that separate the trash, all the garbage. One more thing I realized, I was so surprised that there's a tourist accidentally dropped the tissue paper on the ground, and there's a cleaner, the road cleaner, I think, the street cleaner, was tapping her shoulder. Can you pick it up, please? Oh, sorry. Immediately pick it up. But I was thinking, if this happened in my country, everything will go viral. Yeah, and bad intention to all the public. So then I realized that why other country can change strictly. I'm afraid. I make sure that I don't drop anything. And why can't all the government around the world can do, right? Especially in my country, Malaysia, we are not embarrassing them, but we try to collect as much data as we can before we go all out to important meeting and proposal to change something for our people in North Borneo. But yeah, of course, we will share all the database as well to Australia, any country. Yeah. So people are important to make this change. Don't talk about government. We can change everything. Yeah.
just on that, like we were talking before about the people power. You know, if you reduce this demand if you've got industries that are these water bottle companies, other companies that are just producing this trash, if you have the people that are rallying behind, like, no, we're not going to stand for this, we don't want to buy these bottles of water, you know, go off plastic water bottles for 7 years like you have, Monica. Like, it's this people power that helps drive government, and then it's also the government that helps, you know, can help drive this this change in behaviour for us as well. They can also put these kinds of restrictions on, you know, what we're purchasing and what's available for us to buy as well. So does anyone else have any more questions? Dom, you got one? Yeah, I'll be microphone runner.
There are some stories coming from Asia, from I think Indonesia, but potentially Malaysia as well, where government actually does try and do more things of like having buses where you can pay with plastic bottles, having buyback schemes to make people like do recycling. Do we have any idea yet if that works, if that has an impact of like what we find on beaches, or like are people using that? Is it successful?
Anyone brave?
I'll have a go. I think that I haven't heard any findings from those initiatives. I know and Malaysia's a good example. They're doing some good things, and Indonesia has committed $1 billion to deal with their marine plastic issue. So there's definitely strategies out there, and some of those you mentioned are ones, but whether they're having an effect or not, I think it's too early to say. I know, just to draw it back to New South Wales, with our container deposit legislation, our earn and learn, what's it called? Return and earn, sorry. Yeah, Queensland has a different one. Yeah. They're doing, they've got before data, and then they're doing the government's doing some surveys after. So that this last year and this year, they're doing surveys. So we should know in the next little bit about the status of those. But in terms of answering your question, no, unless anyone else wants. I might say so. Sorry, this is Sarah Jo, by the way.
My apologies for being late. I'm a little bit sick this morning. I guess it's more to do with the stuff that I know about with those type of schemes. They're more of a long-term situation. For example, Germany has had their return bottles for a long time, so they're seeing success, but that's more of an ingrained lifestyle situation where people know that they can recycle their bottles and pick them up and get them recycled. They do, anecdotally say that South Australia is a lot cleaner than the other states of Australia because they've had things like their return schemes for a lot longer than most of our states. But the actual data, do you know what I mean? It depends on correlating a particular area, how many people are actually returning bottles to that particular area, and then is there a diminishing amount of bottles actually being found in that area. So it's very hard to correlate that data. But what I find, if you're going to talk about, those type of schemes, you have to get the data from a long, long, long time, and it's probably more to do with the actual attitude of that place in itself, maybe not so much the scheme specifically. It's like that area is used to or knows that they can return stuff, or they're already really onto reducing what they use, or they've already got multiple other recycling schemes. So I think here in Australia, it's a little bit hard to find the data at the moment. But that's what most of these people that we're doing, we are collecting the data, so we have the data from beach cleans and then can eventually correlate it to see if there is a difference. For example, my local area, we've just lost 1 hour return and earn machines. So I'll see if that starts to give a bit of a change in how much plastic bottles we're seeing around the area. I'm not really seeing that much. A lot of our plastic bottles is litter directly on the beach anyway, so it wasn't going to return and earn scheme. And our mangroves, they're collecting a lot of these things, and that's coming from another area. It's coming from a different area, heading up through the rivers and coming back. So unfortunately, I don't really think I have a succinct answer to your question.
Okay, you speak about in Indonesia. Yeah, some of you know that people in Jakarta and Bali, if I'm not mistaken, because I have a lot of scuba diver operator in Indonesia. So they do, those people, they collect the bottle, and I can't remember how many bottle you can exchange for a bus ticket, free. Okay, but as far as I know from my friends, they said no, it's not sustainable. People will still drinking with the bottle and smash it up to collect as much as they can to exchange for a free bus ticket. So it's, to me, I mean, my point of view is not a solution. Yeah, it's not a solution. So most of them agree, most of them are not agree with this kind of activity, which is they can't stop the pollution, I mean the problem. So in Malaysia, I'm not sure how many of you knows that we lost 2 gentle giant whale sharks this year, which I saw them personally, 3 whale sharks coming through all the same water every year. So this year, I never seen one, but we found that we saw 2 dead with full of plastic in the tummy. So, and many turtle dead because of plastic as well. And our North Borneo, especially our province, Sabah, Kota Kinabalu, if you guys know, start taking precautions. They start taking actions like to educate the people in the island and try to, if I'm not mistaken, some of the places in my city, from 50 cents for each plastic bag, they increase to 1 ringgit. So increase it so that people have a thought that, oh, it's too expensive, I don't want plastic. So they give alternative to give away a box. Yeah, a box from all the packaging, you can put all your stuff, carry this box away. So all these things, when, we are human, when we lost a lot of things, then we realize we have to do something now. Yeah, so personally, I don't agree with the exchange ticket, things like that. It's not a solution. Yeah.
It almost has the opposite effect in some situations where people are purposely drinking from these plastic items and eating this sort of stuff just so they can get the bus. So, any other questions that we have on the floor? Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we're going to be a grassroots movement to get the effectiveness. That's kind of what I'm getting from you guys. How do we do that? What's the model? It would seem to me the governments have the data, the governments have the power, possibly the funds to do something, and it's not happening to the level we need, which leaves me feeling quite cynical actually. And it is an overwhelming issue for one person to sit here and say, well, what do we do? What's the model?
I know that is this working? Can you hear me? Yeah. Can anyone hear me anyway? No, you can't. Okay. I thought I'm louder than I am. I get told I'm loud. What I will say, so the federal government gave $5 million this year for marine debris cleanups and source reduction along the Great Barrier Reef. So over 5 years it's gone to the Australian Marine Debris Initiative, or Tangaroa Blue, and a consortium, which includes OSMAP as well. This was the second phase there was a $700,000 amount of money that was given, and the money was given under the threat abatement plan to protect turtles and dugongs. Right? That's where that bucket of money was identified and came from to do that. The $700,000 clearly wasn't enough, but what we needed to do from there, so I worked with the grassroots campaign, with the people on that program, and what I told them was that even though through we're doing beach cleanups and you're collecting data, if that data, it doesn't stand up scientifically, the scientific community are your worst enemy in some ways, right? So what we've done with the $5 million investment is that they're now required to run scientific transects so that you're cleaning an area, because if it's not replicable, so if you've got to keep it, that area we're not cleaning and this area we are cleaning, and then collecting the data. Now, that to someone who's running grassroots campaign is a horrible thing to think of, because all you're trying to do is get rid of, how am I going to walk past that, Fiona? Well, you don't, for the data to be meaningful and to be able to be used and to be able to stand up to then go, all right, I've got to fund an illness here or a marine debris scenario here, for the data to actually stand up, it's got to be quite rigorous. And so I'm saying that the balance is important. So the balance between the cleaning up and the getting people's hands dirty and getting involved and getting connected is as important as getting that data, so that then you can do things like go, okay, so once we've given the $5 million, has that reduced the amount of debris that was in the Great Barrier Reef, or was that a waste of money and a waste of effort from people?
Just the last one from me. I'd just like to address that question in a slightly different way. I think that when we talk about groups that are getting together to do things, I reckon that's fantastic. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we should start at grassroots at home and feel that we can be empowered as well. I know in our home, and we actually looked at how much consumables we were having, and I do a little bit of a personal metric now on our garbage as I take it out, and we've actually massively increased the amount of recycle that we put out compared to stuff we know is going to landfill. So one of the dangers, I think, of thinking, I have to be in some kind of action group or be involved in some plastic campaign, is that it tends to give the general public the feeling that someone else is working on it, that, those people are out there, there's this group that deals with that, I don't have to worry about it, and we go back in this big apathy cycle again. So although those groups do a wonderful job, and I acknowledge the job they're doing, I think we all have to work from home, whether it means taking your own coffee cup to meetings like this, or, when you go into your local coffee shop, say, I brought my own cup if you're not smart enough to have, a crockery one or whatever. So I just want to make that point. It's a real danger in thinking somebody else is doing it.
I really believe in the phrase, think global and act local. And I think in our own communities, no one knows the community better than the people that live there. And so if you can work in your own community and, start at home, but then also connect with other groups that are doing things and work on a plan from there. And then once you have that community starting, you're louder together. And I think we also forget how powerful it is to just book a meeting with your local MP and talk to them about how you care. And we always forget about that as an individual action with plastic pollution. We're always thinking about bringing around stuff and things like that, which is awesome. But never forget to use your own voice and book a meeting with your local MP and things like that. And that has a huge impact as well. And that's something that we just have to keep doing, because I think the alternative is to just do nothing. And I feel like you just can't do that. You've got to keep doing it.
We might as well keep going. Yeah. There is sources of money out there. So the New South Wales EPA have small grants for local communities and individuals, so local litter check. So you can be doing surveys in your local area and submit a small grant, a simple form to get some funds to actually allow you to do that. But and it can be done anywhere. So it's not just people on beaches. So if you live inland, it could be a river, could be just a park. So you can do those anywhere. That's all I'll say.
Try not to be downhearted by it. Some days I have down days too, and I go, and then something happens and reminds me that every little thing that we do does have an impact. So I kind of think about it, it's got to be top up and bottom down. So even with the green routes, the more people that know about the problem, it's going to have a flow-on effect. So exactly like how it was saying, if you start local. So we're still finding about businesses that didn't know that there was options out there for them to give up single-use plastics or be better waste management. So it feels like it's a hard slog, but then that business, it's easier then to convince another business. And then even like here, for example, there's no water refill station. So it feels like it might be hard, but if all of us here today email the ICC, it might not happen for 4 years, but in 4 years we might have a refill station. So that's the top-up approach. The down approach is maybe also think, well, who we vote for, But even if you didn't vote for who's in power at the moment or our leaders, they're still human. So a couple of our local members, they still didn't know, and one of them was our Environment Minister, that coffee cups were lined with plastic. They still didn't know. So some days I wake up and I go, how do these people not know? But we have to remember they're human. They do so much every day. So the approach of exactly like Harriet, if you contact them, even just a little bit of information may change their mind, or if you make something easier and popular for them to be a part of. So what we're finding now in our local area, if we constantly do things and do the events, get the information out there, they eventually come on board. In my local area, they don't want to be the first people doing something environmentally. So it's actually changing sometimes the perspective of who you work with. So in some places it's easier, some councils are, leading the way, other places it's not. So I kind of think sometimes you want to be loud and shame people, but also maybe thinking about the encouragement perspective, because I find the positive way seem to be working a lot more for me.